like, what else do I have left to prove? What, going to like the number one get and going to New York? And do I have to show everyone that to show, oh, look, I made it? I don't think so. I think you get to a point in your career where you're comfortable enough where you're done market climbing and where you have to go for quality of life.
Welcome to Voices and Visionaries, the podcast featuring the female forces in sports media. I'm Kelly Burke, and joining me today is Siera Santos, a sports anchor and reporter at Fox 10 in Phoenix. Siera also is a fellow Arizona State and Walter Cronkite School of Journalism graduate. Go Devils! Siera, great to have you on the show. How are you?
Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it. Like, I was getting ready and I'm like, I usually don't put makeup on my days off, but you know what? I'm excited to talk right now. I was like, I'll put a little blush on. It's all good. So thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And I'm excited to talk to you.
Excited to connect with you. And I appreciate you putting on the makeup. I know we have to wear it so much with what we do that it's a pain in the butt on your days off when you just want to be barefaced and lounge around, not do your hair. And then here I am making you do it.
No, it's a good thing because I got people to meet up with after this. So it was like I was already ready. Now I can get in the car and go.
Good. You started about 9 months ago at Fox 10 in Phoenix. What's been the most surreal part about covering the sports teams that you grew up watching?
It's super weird. It's been honestly challenging. I think the most challenging part for me is not even the game part of it, but just I have not done a single show in the studio since I arrived, which is wild. I've only gone inside the studio once to sign my paperwork, and that was pretty much it. And so one of the best things, as you know, is like your coworkers and getting to connect with people and, talking shit in the newsroom. Like that's like one of the best parts of the job. And there is downtime, like in between your shows or whatever, you chat with people and you connect with people. And that's been one of the hardest parts of coming here during the beginning of the pandemic is not being able to meet my coworkers, not being able to hang out in the studio. And then on top of that, somebody asked me in a student forum, like, how do you make connections with athletes via Zoom and, via Zoom conference call? And I told her, I said, you don't. I don't know how you could possibly make some type of personal connection with somebody when there are 25 other people on the call. It's like you can't really have those personal type of conversations with somebody, and it feels weird, or I don't know, it feels icky. I'm just not a big fan of it. So whereas one of my strengths, I feel like, is being able to make connections with athletes, I can't do that because I haven't even met any of them face to face. The only one I've gotten to meet that I did a one-on-one interview with thus far has been Larry Fitzgerald. And that was because he was doing a COVID type event where he was providing meals for first responders. So he's the only one I've gotten to meet face to face and say, hi, I'm Siera, like, good to meet you. I'm the new kid in town. And of course he was fantastic. I mean, he's the ultimate professional. But as far as, Diamondbacks games, Cardinals games, ASU games, Coyotes games, none of them. I haven't been able to talk to anybody. So it's kind of, I hate to say this, but it's taken a lot of the joy out of my job. That's one of the things that I love to do is getting to know people. And you just really can't do that right now.
I appreciate your honesty and your vulnerability with sharing that because it's so true. And it's especially in a market like Phoenix, like you said, the relationships are built by showing up in person because those athletes, they get used to seeing you regularly and they know, okay, Siera she's here covering our team all the time. She's somebody I can trust. I know her face.
Exactly. And you just really see the thing is too, I don't immediately try to break off and have a side conversation with a player, especially a male player immediately, because I, I understand wanting to be aggressive, but I just think as a female, there's different type of tactics that we have to use. And I think one of them is exactly what you're talking about. Somebody seeing your face all the time, getting familiarity with your face, and then ultimately respecting you because you are there all the time. And then you can you can start with saying hello and how's your day going? And then you can finally break in and after a while have a more serious conversation.
How did you learn some of the tactics that you're talking about that we use as females that are different than our male counterparts? How did you learn those throughout your career?
I just have seen it the way it works. And if you go in there guns a-blazing and pull, you know, X and X pitcher to the side and want to have a conversation with him right away, and you've never been in the clubhouse before, chances are some of the time, I'm not saying this happens every time, but he might be like, well, can I get your number? After the conversation is done. And when you were trying to just show that you're establishing yourself, sometimes players misconstrue that. I had, for example, a girl who was like an associate producer, an AP at one of the stations I was working at. And she was also a writer, and she had gone into the hockey dressing room, and she had asked a player, can I grab you one-on-one? And he was like, absolutely, sure. And so she did the one-on-one interview with him. And then after she turned off the recorder, they stayed and they chatted for a little bit more. And then he was like, so what are you doing later tonight? And she flipped out, and she confided in me, what would you do in this situation? And I'm like, I would have turned off the recorder, said, thank you for your time. I'll see you next time, and walked away. Because the more of those interviews you have that are strictly professional, they'll understand I'm here to do my job. I'm not here to be your girlfriend.
You're so right, though, because I think we all, as females, have some sort of story, and most likely multiple stories like that throughout the course of our career.
Exactly. And I've seen it happen a lot and frequently, and there's really not much you can do. And other women have asked, or young, especially students have asked, what do you do in that situation? And you say, I've worked really hard to get here. And especially with baseball, I'll be like, do you want to go back to the minor leagues? And they're like, no. I'm like, well, I don't either. Like, I worked hard to get here. This is my major league forum. So I'm not trying to take 6 steps back by dating you and putting my job. Because the thing is, what's going to happen is 90% of the time, you're going to be the one that gets in trouble. You're going to be the one that gets your credential taken away if you're caught messing around with a player, whereas nothing will happen to them.
What's interesting is when one of the jobs that I got, on my interview, the sports director actually asked me what my philosophy was on dating players, because they had a female that had been in my position previously at that station, that she had sort of secretly dated one of the baseball players on the minor league team. And she ended up marrying the guy, but regardless, it became a big thing because the station found out about it. And obviously it was a conflict of interest because she was covering the team. And so when I was asked that on my interview, I was kind of taken aback. Like, what do you mean? What do I do? I have a strict rule. I've never, and I will not ever date coaches or athletes I cover. It's a total conflict of interest. And the guy that was interviewing me, who eventually was my boss, said, okay, that's great to hear, because we had an issue with that.
Yeah, he had already seen from experience, but I always think it's a good idea. Don't mix business with pleasure. But there's other circumstances where it has worked out, and there's no issue with it. And I just don't consider myself that lucky in anything in my life where I'm like, oh yeah, that would just totally work out and I'd get to keep my job. And you've seen kind of in different market. And the one thing is, players will always be like, no one's going to know. No one's going to find out. Please, everybody knows. Everybody finds out. It's going to be the worst kept secret in the entire market. Trust me. So I always tell girls, I just say, just avoid it. Listen, if what you want to do is date athletes, you don't have to be, don't get a journalism degree to do that. Get an Instagram.
Totally. Siera, you've worked in some of the biggest TV markets there are. Chicago and LA come to mind. What did those experiences teach you that helped you realize you were ready to start this new chapter back home in Phoenix?
I think that one of my goals was to be a regional sports reporter and be a beat reporter and cover a team. And I did that in Chicago. I got to cover the White Sox and it was awesome. And I really felt sometimes people go into college or they graduate and they say, I want to be a Sports Center anchor. And if that doesn't happen, then I'm a failure. I didn't even really have those aspirations because I was like, that's just not even possible. I don't even think that's going to happen in my life. So, if Sports Center were to come calling and say, hey, Siera, we want to hire you. Okay, that's another thing. But it wasn't even on my radar. So what I wanted to do was tell stories, be able to get inside information that nobody else would ever be able to get. And especially covering baseball, when you're there every single day, it is a grind. Mm-hmm. And players see that because they know the local TV outlets, they don't show up all the time. There's just no way to show up all the time. There's other sports going on. And that's the one thing in local TV is that you can't be there every day. There's just no way. And you have an obligation to cover the full spectrum of sports in your market. So it would be unfair to just go to the Diamondbacks every single day and ignore whatever the Coyotes doing, or vice versa. The other thing too is I moved around a lot, and it's kind of, I got to the point where I love Chicago. It's one of my favorite cities in the world. But at the same time, I also have a family here that I have been away from for 10 years. Mm-hmm. And I missed my nieces and nephews growing up. My oldest nephew is a senior in high school now. Wow. Like, I miss those formidable years. You know what I mean? And my parents are getting older. And I kind of wanted to be closer to home. And you get to a point where I don't feel like, what else do I have left to prove? Going to like the number one market and going to New York, and do I have to show everyone that to show, oh, look, I made it? I don't think so. I think you get to a point in your career where you're comfortable enough where you're done market climbing and where you have to go for quality of life.
That's so well said. You started your career in Colorado Springs and in news, no less, as a multimedia journalist and MMJ. And I know you got to do a little bit of sports and you covered the Broncos some of the time too. How did you parlay that job into a full-time sports gig?
This is kind of a long story. I'll make it as condensed as possible. But there was actually an opening for the weekend sports anchor job at that station. And they decided, I was told by the GM that Southern Colorado wasn't ready for a female sports anchor, especially a minority. And so there was another position that came open for a morning reporter position. And I hated doing hard news. I'm not even going to lie. I didn't like doing hard news. I didn't like covering accidents. I didn't like covering sexual assaults. I am not good at disassociating myself with the story. Like, I take it whole night. I cannot I internalize it. I feel sorry for victims, and I feel sorry for the fans that you interview that are crying. I wish I were better at not, internalizing it, but I'm not. So long story short, there was a morning reporter's position that came open. That was another position that I got turned down for because the only other Hispanic at the station was also on the morning. So they didn't want to put the two Hispanics in the same time slot. And so I asked to be let out of my contract, and I took all my sports stuff. So luckily I was at the NBC affiliate, and I had gotten to do a ton of Olympics coverage and stuff like that because the Olympics were on NBC, and I had already had experience shooting high school football. So I did high school football every Friday. And so I applied for a producer photog position in Oklahoma City, and I ended up getting it. And there was no guarantee that I was going to be on there, but I was so unhappy doing news that I was willing to take that gamble that I may not be on air at this position, but at least I'm covering sports. And I ended up taking the risk. And then I think I was on air in less than 2 months. And it wasn't something where I pushed it. I was just like, no, I'm going to show you that I can produce the show. I'm going to show you that I can shoot these games. And soon enough, they were like, hey, Siera, we need you to anchor, or we need you to report. So it came by itself.
That's awesome. Good for you. You've worked in markets all over the country, from, as you mentioned, Colorado Springs, Oklahoma City, Los Angeles, Chicago, at a couple different places. What are the biggest misconceptions about having a career in local TV?
That I think that people think that small markets just suck, and they're not that bad. Like, you get to meet friends that you be friends with forever and ever for your whole entire career. My roommate in Colorado Springs is still one of my best friends. She's now like big time Fox News Network correspondent. Like,
wow.
She's a big deal. And so she is still one of the people I talk to all the time, where I confide in her. We talk about career stuff. We talk about relationships, boyfriends, whatever, you name it. So we used to have so much fun. And I mean, I think that there's this, especially with students who are graduating right now, nobody ever wants to go to a small market. Okay. We all want to start in Phoenix, but 90% of the time, especially in sports, it's just not going to happen. You got to go put in your time somewhere, and it'll come, but you got to stick it out. And I also think that one of the issues that I've seen with females that are trying to make their transition from their first job to maybe their second job in sports is they might be overshooting. So like, if you're in market 157 and you're trying to apply to something in Dallas, there are a lot of other female candidates that are in those mid markets that are probably more qualified. So I feel like I've talked to a lot of females who were not upset, but just kind of, man, what do I do? And my advice is always like, just shoot for the mid-market, because it's 2 years of your life. And the worst thing that can happen is you'll get better. Yeah. And I don't think that's a bad thing.
That's really interesting that you say the part about the women that are in small markets and trying to jump to big markets, because I agree. I see that a lot too with people that ask me for advice. And I think sometimes you can get overconfident in this, because you're like, okay, I did the whole small market thing. I made all these sacrifices. I've gotten a lot better, but you don't realize how many talented people there are in our industry. There's so many good people.
And it's so wild because like I'll have sports reporters and younger sports broadcasters tell me they're real, and I'm like, damn, she's good. Like, she's super good. And like, there's some girls that, oh my gosh, they have so much personality on camera. The problem is the talent pool is huge. And you know how when we were in college, there was that natural progression. You start in a small market, you go mid-market, and you go big market, and then you either go to a regional or you go to ESPN. And that was the trajectory, right? The issue has become is that a couple of years ago, ESPN laid off a ton of really qualified people. That saturated the talent pool. Mm-hmm. And then look, once again, ESPN just had 300 layoffs, 200 open jobs that they're not going to fill. So you're going to have a lot of really talented people, once again, looking for work. And a lot of local job markets, especially sports departments, have been on hold with their hiring. I was talking to my agent not that long ago, and he reached out to a news director about a certain job, and they were like, yeah, it's open, but we're not even going to think about filling it until 2021. Wow. So it's stagnant right now. That's why I'm like, if you're in a job, be thankful that you have one. And if you don't have a job, they'll come, but it's going to take a while.
It struck me that when you were in Chicago, you were the first Latina on staff at NBC Sports Chicago in the number 3 sports market in the country, which blows my mind because it's Chicago, and it seems that doesn't seem progressive at all. Why do you think there are so few front-facing Latina women in sports?
That's a good question. I think that there are far more that are aspiring now, but I think it was just honestly the lack of representation on TV when you're growing up and you're watching those games. You didn't see anybody that looked like you, so you didn't think it was feasible or possible. I know I certainly didn't, and I think maybe that would have changed my aspirations if there had been somebody who looks like me doing SportsCenter or something like that. Maybe I would have been, okay, I want to do that one day. But most of the time when you're talking about women that we looked up to, it was like the number one name was like, I want to be the next Erin Andrews. Well, there isn't a Erin Andrews. Erin Andrews is Erin Andrews. Erin Andrews will always be Erin Andrews, and that is her. That is her. So aspire to be the next one of yourself, right? But with the lack of representation, I don't know. I think that now more networks are gunning for minority female representation, where in the past it didn't. They may have said that they want that, but maybe it wasn't. It wasn't in the hiring decisions. Yeah. But you look at like MJ Acosta, like she NFL Network. I mean, so like seeing her rise has been huge, and that's one of the Latinas and one of the biggest roles right now. You can also look at Tony Collins at ESPN. Mm-hmm. Again, but there's so few and far between that there's far more. People ask me that all the time. Oh, what do you think do you think it's really hard to get a job as a woman in sports? I don't think it's hard to get a job as a woman in sports. In fact, a lot of sports departments are trying to diversify their staff, but they're not necessarily trying to diversify it with minority females. Yeah. It's they take off the box with females, but it's not necessarily women of color.
You hit the nail on the head. What challenges, you mentioned some of the things that your news director in Colorado Springs said to you, so that could be lumped in this question, but what challenges have you faced as a Hispanic woman in sports media?
I think the biggest thing, there's been a lot of off comments that have been said to me that I'm just like, why would you say that? And there have been a lot of instances. I think the most just outright discrimination was in Colorado Springs. I don't think it gets really worse than that. I think that's just the way everything went down. It was a really terrible experience. And honestly, I wanted to quit after that. I was just like, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. I called my dad. My dad's like my biggest fan. And I'm like, Dad, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm quitting. And he's like, just get a job in sports. And if you still hate it, I will buy your plane ticket home. And I'm like, okay, fine. So here I am, like 8 years later, and I'm still doing it. But I think there's a lot of different outlets too that Hispanic women can use, like especially NAHJ. I'm really involved in HJ, and that's opened up so many doors for me, and it's helped me connect with so many different people. So I always recommend, no matter what you do, whether you are African American or whether you're just a woman in sports, join one of the professional organizations, because I think those are huge training grounds, and it's great to make connections. It's a great way to potentially find a job. I remember I went to NHJ before I got hired by NBC Sports Chicago, and I called 2 days after I accepted the job, and they were like, this is such and such news director in Tampa. And I was like, I'd met with her, and I was like, hey, how are you? She's like, hey, I got a job opening for a sports director, interested. And I'm like, I actually just accepted a job, but thank you so much. So there are things like that had several friends that only go to the conferences. They never have applied for anything. They just go to the conferences and manage to get their next job every single time.
Wow.
So I don't know. I want to say, I think one of the things that I was apprehensive about, honestly, when I was applying to 10, and as I was like, well, Richard Sines is there, he's going to be the number one guy. I was like, there's no way they're going to have 2 Latinos in the same sports department in the market. There's no way. Like, I was just like, they already got their token Latino. I can just forget it. You know what I mean? So I discounted myself, thinking there's no way they're going to want this. And thank God that they did, and they saw the opportunity, and that it wasn't so much about having a Santos or a Sines or whatever last name you have. It was more about what I bring to the table, and not necessarily my background or my race, right? Yeah. So I think you get discouraged though. You know what I mean? You look at a sports department, if they already have a female, you're like, nah, there's no way they're going to hire me. There's no way they're going to hire me. And that's how I felt also at Fox 32 in Chicago, is that they already had a main anchor sports director who was male. They had their weekend person who was a female, and they were looking for a number 3. And I was like, I'll apply, I guess, but they already got their female. And they were like, nope, there's room for one more. I was like, all right, let's do this. So sometimes you're pleasantly surprised. So I think when you look at the station bios and you see that, oh, they already have a woman, shoot, go apply. Who cares?
Yeah.
They can only say no.
That's good advice. I literally had those same thoughts as I would apply for jobs in local TV when I was in it. You know
exactly what I mean.
Yeah, because I'd look at the bios of the station. Exactly. If they had a woman, I'm like, I'm not going to get this. I'm going to apply, but I'm not going to get this job. They already have a woman.
Right. And I think that we often think that way. And, it's the same thing though. If you are African-American, you look at, they say, oh, they already have an African-American, they don't want it. So I think it's really shitty that we think that way. You know what I mean? And it's really shitty that news directors think that way, or the people that are doing the hiring usually think that way. So we think that way. Yeah. But I think that I'm hoping that this is going to be an ongoing change. You know what I mean? And it's crazy to me that Richard Sines and I are the only 2 minorities that work in sports now, with the retirement of Bruce Cooper in this market. So it is what it is, and hopefully it continues to change.
I'm just so glad that Fox 10, it's not even a risk that they took. I don't look at it as a risk, but I just love everything about that they decided to make that decision, because as you and I talked about off air before we started taping this, you don't see that. You just don't see that in local TV. And really everything we're talking about, it's really a referendum and reflection on our industry and the fact that our industry has to be better.
Yeah, I know, I agree. And I think it's slowly changing. I think what people want to see themselves represented on TV. And that's the bottom line. They want to see themselves on TV. And if you're not accurately reflecting your viewers, you're doing your entire station a disservice.
Mm-hmm. In doing research on you, I've followed your career kind of as you've risen the ranks. I didn't realize that you dropped out of high school and you eventually got your GED, and then you went on to Arizona State where you graduated with honors. How did going through that time in high school shape who you are today?
It wasn't easy. And I honestly if you would have asked me if I was in high school, if I thought I was going to be here, and the answer is absolutely not. So one of the things is I was really apprehensive to share my story in the beginning because I thought that people would judge me. I thought they would think I was a loser, or they, say, oh, you're a drug addict, or you're this, or you're that. And the truth is, I just was a bad kid. I was a wild child. I was all over the place, and I don't think that that's an uncommon story. I don't think that that's a unique thing. I think usually there's always like one in the family, right? So I dropped out because I was in inpatient treatment for the second time. I had issues with eating disorders and all different types of things. So I was actually in a bad girl boot camp, and that's where I got my GET, was in Southern Utah. And then when I got back home, I was pretty much, I don't want to say grounded, but like my parents were like, you're not using the car, you're staying right here. And so my dad was also like, you're also waking your ass up at 8:00. Like, I'm not letting you sleep in and waste the day. So essentially my dad would get me up, we'd drink our morning coffee, we'd read the paper together, we'd share the sports section. And I had always been like a casual sports fan, but being grounded at home during summer, I watched the Diamondbacks every day. Like every day, that's what I looked forward. Not that there was no Netflix, and I couldn't like go binge watch Game of Thrones or whatever. It didn't work like that. So I would look forward to watching the Diamondbacks every day. I watched the pregame show, I watched the game, I watched the postgame show. So I was tracking them where they were at in the standings. I was like, okay, NL West, blah, blah. And so that upcoming Sun season, I was like, yo, Dad, we got to get season tickets to the Suns because they're going to win the championship this year. And this is when it was Amari Stoudemire, Steve Nash, Sean Marion. And he was like, no way, they are way too expensive, which they were. They were sold out every single game. So we went to a couple regular season games, and then we went to, I think, 2 postseason games. And of course, they didn't win the championship. And so then the next year I was like, Dad, we have to get season tickets to the Suns, because if we don't get season tickets to the Suns, it's going to be a struggle just like last year to get tickets for the championship. And so he's like, he finally broke down and we got a half season package. So we went to every other game. And it was that point, like through that first beginning half of the basketball season, I was like, yo, games for the rest of my life. And so that's when I enrolled in community college. And I got a 4.0 to get into the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication, graduated with honors, rest is history, right? But I think because I waited until I knew exactly what I wanted to do, it had a big impact on my motivation. So there was nothing wrong with me. I wasn't a stupid kid. It just didn't like going to high school. Yeah. And I think that that's not like a unique thing. I think that high school isn't for everyone. And so when I did get to college, when I was in my geometry class, I was getting like an A+, and I was getting really good grades because I was like, okay, if I get past this geometry class, I am one step to being a sports reporter. And that's ultimately what I want. So I think it gave me better motivation, where I saw some of the like other kids in my class were, philosophy class. And I mean, see kids, their eyes are like glazed over. They're like in a huge lecture hall. And I'm like, yeah, this is great. This is great stuff, taking notes and everything, because I saw the long-term vision. Whereas sometimes if you're in school and you kind of like aren't sure what you want to do, or you're on the fence, it makes going to school a lot harder. So I think that really helped, actually, long term it helped. And I'm also thankful because my parents never gave up on me. They've easily been like, you're an F up, like you figure it out on your own, and they didn't.
You're bilingual. You minored in Spanish at ASU, and I think I even read that you know Dutch. How have you used that bilingual experience to your benefit, especially covering baseball?
I think baseball is where it definitely helps the most. You just have a different connection with the Latin players, and you can learn Spanish, right? And try to have a conversation and try to do an interview in Spanish. But it's really hard. It's really hard. And, I talk to a lot of baseball beat writers that are really trying hard to learn Spanish, but it's never, unless you're speaking Spanish every single day, it's going to be really a special conversation, and you may never get really meaningful quotes or meaningful sound bites out of somebody. I also think it's helped because I've encountered interpreters. And sometimes I listen to how they are reading the player, and it's nothing what the player said, or it's taken out of context, or there's critical information that's been left out. Like, I'll give you an example. One time, this player was talking about a guy who was going to the All-Star game, and he said that he was a superestrella. He's a superstar. And the guy, he said he's a good player, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, whoa. There's a big difference between saying somebody is a superstar versus a good player. Like, that's vital information or vital details that get left out if you don't understand. So I think it really helped me build a connection with Latinos within the clubhouse, because they knew that they could trust me, especially to do an interview, because when I do an interview in Spanish and then it's a long form interview, I work so hard to translate it perfectly, not take anything out of context. I don't take liberty or like artistic license with their words, because I wouldn't want anyone to do that to me.
Yeah.
It would be really upsetting to me. So I think it's huge for covering baseball, football, or, covering the Suns. No, not really. But with baseball, it is huge.
Your bio says that you enjoy making margaritas from scratch. And you're talking to a margarita aficionado here. So what is the key to making a good margarita?
Tequila. You have to have right tequila. Like, I do not do, like, in my younger days, I was big on like some crappy Patron, just like, oh, let's take shots. Give me lime. No, you got to have some good tequila. So I'm big into añejos, reposados. Like, I'm big into a good tequila, because if you have a good tequila, you don't need all the other bullshit, like you can make a good tequila, or you can make a good margarita just by having a good tequila. So I tend to go with organic agave, fresh limes, so I squeeze them right then and there, and then a little bit, not a little bit, a lot of tequila, and typically I'll muddle fresh fruit. So my favorite is like a jalapeno watermelon margarita. Oh my God, it's so good. And I'll send you the recipe.
I'm just, next time I'm in town seeing my parents in Phoenix, I'm just going to call you up and like, yeah, you're going to make me one. I'm gonna have you make me one.
No, it's fun. And like when moving back here, I had the time because the bars were closed. It's not like I could go get my own margarita. I'd like have a bartender whip one up. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to really try and like perfect my recipe. And I did. And I actually was in a margarita competition for Chicago Latino Network. And I was in and I came in second.
Oh,
and
nice.
I swear to God, that's it. That thing was rigged. I don't know what they're talking about. I had the bombest margarita there, but apparently that guy who had won the year I participated had won the previous year as well. So maybe he's sliding a couple 20s in the judges' pockets. I don't know.
I can't wait to get that recipe. The whole spicy sweet thing I'm all about right now.
Yeah, I had a margarita the other night, and the guy was like, he said, "Oh, it's a spicy, blah, blah, blah." And I tried, I was like, this is not spicy. He's like, okay, next time I'll muddle it more. I'm like, yeah, muddle it more, bro.
I know that your experience in Phoenix right now hasn't been a normal one in local TV, but the stories you have covered, what's been your favorite sports story so far?
That's a good question. We did a really fun shoot with a chef who is, he does a lot of he's not his personal chef, but he does a lot of meal preps for Kyler Murray. And so he was so fun to talk to, and he had such a cool backstory on how he got to where he's at. That was one of the fun ones I've gotten to do. We don't get to do too many features and stuff like that just because there is still a lot of limitations with who we can have interaction with. For example, we have to take our temperature and fill out an entire survey on an app before we even leave to go cover a story. So we're always very cautious. And I think that was probably one of my favorite stories that I've gotten to cover, though, because the food was good. And the guy he was just, when you vibe with somebody, like when you're doing an interview and you're vibing, you're like, yeah, well, like we're on the same page. That's how basically I felt with him. And so Chef Ron, shout out, like he was one of my favorite people that I've gotten to interview since I've been back. And it's fun to do a human interest story like that. And he's also doing meal preps that are healthy. He doesn't just do like lobster mac and cheese. He's doing meal preps that are healthy and they're really tasty. So it's cool because he gets people that are like, they're like, this isn't healthy. And he's like, no, it is. No, it's good for you. It's only this and this many calories. And they're like, I don't believe you. It tastes too good. So he's showing people that you can eat healthy and have it be delicious. It just depends on the seasoning you're using and all that good stuff.
Last question, and it's a really serious one. The best and worst part about working with Richard Saenz?
So the best part is he will do whatever he can to help out his coworkers. He is, if you need, like there was an issue where I needed him to cover for so that I could go to a birthday party, and he didn't even flinch. He was just like, I got you. And it was no big deal. So the fact that the man is the hardest working sports anchor in Phoenix. He is out there all the time on his days off. He's out there covering practice. He's getting it done. The worst part, he is always talking smack, and he'll do it out of nowhere on live television when he like tosses to me, and I'm like, Richard, like, I don't even have a comeback to that. Like he just talks mad smack. And they told me, they go, Richard's a prankster. So just watch out. Richard likes to play jokes. And he doesn't like to play jokes. He's got jokes all the time. And I'm just like, even the other day, he was like, so this has been a pretty tough weekend for you, huh? With your Sun Devils. And I'm like, Richard. So he's so funny. He's so witty, and he's a great person to work with. And Phoenix is really lucky to have had somebody like him in the market for this long. I mean, he's been here for 17 plus years, and it's not that often that you get a legacy sports broadcaster. There are a couple in Phoenix, but I think he's now like, I'm not going to say he's the oldest, but he's the most seasoned.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's been instrumental. I mean, it seems like a million years ago now that I interned at Fox 10, but I mean, he's been huge throughout my career, just as a mentor and somebody I can call when I have questions or need advice on something. He's steady. And like you said, he's got a great sense of humor. Just wait till you are back in the office. Those pranks will come out in full force.
I'm honestly scared because I'm good at handling jokes. I'm good at people, giving it to me. We'll have to see how far do these pranks go. Are we talking like whoopee cushions on your rolling chair? That I can deal with. I'm trying to figure out, or is he going to put like chili powder in my lipstick? That's what I'm waiting for. I'm not sure.
Anything else you want to talk about or add that we haven't covered?
No, I mean, I would say as far as like advice goes for younger girls, like don't feel like there was a girl who said, I want to be the White Sox sideline reporter. Well, guess what? They just eliminated that position. So don't feel like if the White Sox are your most favorite team, if the St. Louis Cardinals are your most favorite team in the world, don't limit yourself to just say, okay, I only want to be a sideline reporter. Like, there's other ways to be involved with the team. Like, if there is a team that you just love, there's other ways to go about it. You can go try to work be in-house and part of the media team in-house. I just think that we tend to like make out this little box and say like, if I don't get to this point or if I don't do this job, then my career is a flop. And it's not. Like, you're still working in this business. This is really hard. Like, this business isn't easy. You know that. It's not easy. And if you can stick it out, props to you. And sometimes it's not for everyone. I mean, if it's not easy to be away from your family. I was away from my mom and dad for 10 years. I missed a lot of stuff. And now I'm home, and I'm lucky that I can take every advantage of it. So I'm thankful to be back. That's for sure.
Well, Phoenix is lucky to have you, and look forward to the day sooner than later that I can fly home to Phoenix and meet you in person.
Oh, girl, I got a margarita on tap for you. It's chilling right now. I'll bring up the good stuff too.
Good. Love it.